Hey everybody, welcome to Off the Shelf Board Game Reviews. This video is part of a series covering my 2019 edition of my top 51 tabletop games of all time. Now this list has one brand new game on it and a little bit of shuffling going on, but enough of the want stuff. Let's bring everything down to the table. You know how this list is going to go. This is going to start with number 20 all the way to number 11. Here we go. Number 20 on the list, and rocketing up for number 3 is Three Kingdoms. Now the best way to describe this game is if you were ever into video games or computer games in the late 80s, early 90s, you may remember a couple games such as Nobunaga's Ambition, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or you may even remember the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This is a board game based on that period, and I'm just going to start this whole part of this little top 20 list by saying if you are looking for the absolute best 3-player board game ever made, you're looking at it right here. I know that's saying a lot, but this is a board game that's made for exactly 3 players, and the game is absolutely fantastic. Basically what we have here is we have a board game that's going to take the ancient struggle of the Wu, the Wei, and the Shu clans, who are all fighting for dominance here. And this game takes a whole bunch of fantastic mechanics to go together to create a board game that gives you the feeling of the ancient times, the ancient people, all fighting for control of this wonderful country here. Players are going to be playing an auction style game where they are bidding for control of various actions throughout the turns, and they're going to use their influence based on whatever generals they happen to have. Now some generals are really good at war, some generals are really good at influencing the courts, some generals have different abilities in how they're going to influence the board, and as you're going to gain these generals, you're going to send them out, whether it's going to send them out to go to war, they're going to war over the provinces, they're going to send them out there to help you get better influence, do actions on your turn, or you're going to work on just trying to become the emperor to win extra victory points, because this is a victory point game. Now this game does play for 12 rounds unless one of the other end game conditions happens to be met, and at the end of the game the players are going to add up all their victory points. This game to me is absolutely brilliant and fantastic. Now a lot of the times in your 3-player games you have what's called, or what's really referred to as, a king-making situation. Now, it's almost impossible to avoid a king-making situation in a 3-player game. Basically, the idea of a king-making situation is the person who is furthest behind kind of gets to pick who is the winner, because their actions are either going to give the victory points to player number 1 in victory point order, or player number 2 in victory point order. Now, this game takes that concept and completely embraces it, because the players in number 2 and number 3 spot are always working together against a player in number 1, which to me, in my mind, is an absolutely brilliant mechanic. And not only is it a brilliant mechanic, it actually fits the theme so extremely well. There are so many fantastic things about this board game. I can harp on this game a long time. But to save you the effort, just go ahead and check out my review. It's a really good review, not just saying it because I did it, but it's a really good review because it tells you how to play the game, and it tells you everything that is absolutely fantastic about my number 20. That is Three Kingdoms, the board game. Number 19 on the list, and moving up from 21, is Archipelago. Now, Archipelago is a game for 2 to 5 players. There's actually an expansion for the game, allows you to play the game as a solo game if you like. But the idea of Archipelago is the players are explorers trying to explore a new archipelago and get the most victory points. Now, the first thing that is interesting, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy this game ever so much, is the fact that how the game is going to come to an end and how this game plays. Now, a lot of these games where you're going out there trying to score, going out there doing explorations, finding different lands, doing everything you can to gain victory points and exploration, getting resources and trading with all these open markets and everything like that. Most of those standard games, when you're going to play them, you're just basically playing for a certain amount of victory points or a certain amount of turns, and the game is going to come to an end. Now, the reason why this game is so darn enjoyable for me, one of the main things that first attracted me to this game, is the end game condition and the secrets that this game also enables by having the end game conditions. Now, to stop rambling, to explain what I really mean by this, is the way this game is going to be played is there are secret victory end game conditions when you play this game. At the start of the game, every single player is going to draw one of these cards. This card is going to tell you how the game is going to come to an end, and it's going to tell you how to score victory points based on that ending. Now, the interesting thing about that is every single player is going to get one of these cards at the start of the game, and they're going to get it as a secret. So your objective in this game, while going out there and exploring this archipelago and building this land mass and creating even larger masses, and yes, I'm building the board wrong here, I'm just trying to show you how it grows out here. But as you're going out there and exploring, trying to gain resources, and interacting with the locals and trying to get them to work for you, as the game is explored in this aspect, you need to be watching the other players around the table. You need to be watching their actions and try to figure out why they're doing their actions, and are they trying to gain the victory points to bring around their end game condition that's going to give them the most victory points. Now, of course, there's also open victory point conditions that everybody knows about. So you're working on your secret objective, plus a known objective, plus you're watching what all the other players are doing, because if you know what they're going for, you can also go for it if you want to try to get the victory points. So it's kind of a mind game on top of all these things that are going on here. But the game takes one extra step beyond that, that adds a hidden traitor into it, which is such a unique idea mixed in with this game. Sure, we've all played hidden traitor games before. We all understand the concept of a hidden traitor game. But what this does to the hidden traitor game adds just one more layer on this game that makes it so much more enjoyable. Because one of the players may, it's not always guaranteed, but one player may grab the hidden traitor card. And the only thing you want to do as a hidden traitor is you want to watch the entire continent burn. Now, I'd say that to be a little bit melodramatic and kind of be funny, but you are trying to incite the rebels into rebellion. If they go into rebellion and decide to seek independence, you and you alone win the game. Doesn't matter what else is going on, you are the grand winner. So now you have this little secretive game going on if you happen to be rebellion, or even if you don't have to be the person who's looking out for the insurgents, because you're going to watch what all the other players are doing, because every single turn, all the players need to make decisions that are going to slowly raise the rebellion level of the archipelago as it's growing. So you're going to watch the other players and go, why isn't this person sacrificing resources to keep the rebellion down? Is it because they're wanting the insurgents, or because they don't have the resources, or because they have something else going on, or are they doing a balancing game because they're trying to get the most victory points because of the goal they're trying to do? So you're watching other players, watching what everybody else is doing around the table, because again, there's not a guarantee there's a traitor. So you have this secrecy, this deception, almost this skullduggery that's going on around the game as you're trying to figure out what everybody else is doing, look at all their moves, and try to piece together if they're a traitor, if they're not a traitor, if they're just being greedy, if they're trying to get the most victory points, or whatever's going on. And that just adds the ultimate layer to this game to make this game such a fantastic game. Now, the game is a well-built engine building game where you are, like I said, doing exploration, you're doing trading resources, and yes, this is a cube game where you can get your cubes for all your different resources. There are marketplaces that you're going to deal with that deals with shipping off goods for money, importing stuff, and of course, you need to prevent everybody from becoming restless and creating the grand independence and causing possibly everybody to lose the game, or for that one person who just wants to watch everything burn, watch them win the game. That is Archipelago number 19 on my list. Number 18, and dropping down from number 13, is Vinhos by Vital Lacerda and Eagle and Griffin Games. Now, this game has dropped just a little bit, but actually, if you really think about it, considering this is a top 51 games of all time, being number 18 on our list and dropping 5 points really is not that big of a deal. And I really don't think it's even really dropped. I just think it's the fact that so many great games have come out in the past that have made it kind of set where I think it's going to stick for quite a while. Now, in the game of Vinhos, the idea of Vinhos is that you are trying to become the grandest winemaker to make the best wines and score the most victory points by impressing the wine moguls, by building your wineries, by building your grape places where all your grapes are going to be produced into wine, while you're watching what the weather is doing and doing all these things and importing your wines across the world to become the richest, the wealthiest, and to score the most victory points. Now, the game of Vinhos is very, very interesting. It's a very deep, very strategic game that is done extremely well. Well, it's a Vital Lacerda game. What do you expect? Every game he designs, and you're probably going to hear me say this, well, I've already said it once, so I'm saying it for a second time, but every single game that he designs matches the theme with the mechanics. Sure, every one of his games look very, very deep and rich and hard to learn when you first learn how to play the game, but every time you bring out one of his games and once you appreciate how the rules match the mechanics, all of his games really, really make sense, and this game is no exception to that rule. He has taken an idea that seems like it wouldn't even be that exciting of a game, and he has turned it into this fantastic design game where every single player literally has their own winery, and you're literally trying to build up the estates. You're doing all this resource management. You're trying to gather all you can to watch the weather. You're trying to make guesstimations. Everything that goes on this game just matches the theme of what I think would happen if you were trying to run a winery. Obviously, in a board game form, you can't have the boring drying process because that would drive everybody absolutely crazy. But the game is absolutely fantastic. Now, the game does come with 2 editions. You get the original version of the rules, which allows you to play the original version of Vinhos, or you get the updated 2016 edition of the game. And yes, this board is double-sided to play the original or the 2016 version of the game. Now, I personally, at this point, prefer the 2016 edition of the game. It's not because the 2010 edition is a bad game. No, not at all. I actually think it's a superior game. It's just the fact that, as I talked about when I spoke about Railways of the World, sometimes the amount of time you invest into a game versus the amount of rewards for the game is not always perfect and a good perfect match. Sure, I think the 2010 is a much more strategic game, but the 2016 game is a little bit lighter. Some of the mechanics are a little bit less stressful, and the gameplay is a little bit quicker, and that's why I actually personally prefer the 2016 edition, but I would never turn down a gameplay of the 2010 edition. So Vital Lacerda has created an absolutely fantastic game. This is my number 18 on the list, Vinhos by Vital Lacerda. Number 17 on the new list is Age of Empires 3, or Empires Age of Discovery, which is the remake of the game. And it's basically new improved components, upgrade rules of a game that's actually pretty darn old, but this is a newer, updated version of the game. Now, Empires Age of Discovery is a worker placement, area control, area majority, slightly random game with special powers if you want to include everything in there, including the kitchen sink. The basic idea of the game is this is a game where the player is going to be competing for a track that is going to be resolved from top to bottom and from left to right, basically. Something you have seen probably before if you ever played Dominant Species. If you played Dominant Species before, you're pretty familiar with the track. Basically, on a player's turn, players are going to take their workers and put them in various different locations. By placing their workers in these various locations, they're going to get extra bonuses because some workers are better at certain different things, and some workers do different things once they make it to the new land. Because the objective of the game is go to the new land, grab the resources which are going to give you victory points, and it's also give you the money you need to continue to build your war engine, because this is another thing that's really cool about this game. Now, at its basic level, you look at this game, it's basically a bidding kind of game where you're playing, trying to become the first person and get the locations you need, because every one of those locations can have a finite amount of workers that go to them, and it's first come, first served. The first person there is the first person to get the best resources. It's also an area control game because you're trying to gain control of all these specific areas, because every single age, and there's 3 ages in the game, players can gain victory points based on how much area control they have out here. But the thing that adds extra fun to the game is, like I've said before, I like games where you have agency over what the other players do. I don't like a game where a player can just go in and lock victory points and feel smug and sit back and not keep to work those victory points. This is a game where you need to work on them because players have soldiers they can send out there, which allows them to take over all these areas from the other players. So this is a game that has everything I really enjoy, plus agency, the ability to interact with the other players to create this really fantastic game that plays all the way up to 6 players. Now, I personally think this is one of those games that while it plays longer, it is definitely better at the higher player counts. I would never play this game as a 2-player game, but this game has done everything that I really, really enjoy in area control, area majority, worker style play of the game. You have variable powers if you want to play with them. You have randomization every time you play the game because different buildings are going to come out. Every one of these buildings give you different powers, different abilities, different ways to score victory points once you get to the final age. And all this randomness, while it's not totally random to the point where you can't strategize while you're playing the game, it's random enough to ensure that the game's going to play out differently every single time you play the game. So there's so much variety built in this game, there's so much agency built in this game, and I haven't even included the fact that this game has some absolutely fantastic components. Now, what I'm just showing you here is one of the single armies that come with the game, or one of the single player colors that comes with the game. There are 8 different player colors that come with the game. They are all come with their own individual sculpts. Now, while every single player gets the same kind of sculpts, you got to see that there's multiple different sculpts that come in the game. So it's very easy to look down at the board and see, okay, this player has a missionary out, this player has a soldier out, this person has a standard worker out, this person has an explorer out, this person has a captain. The pieces are extremely easy to see. You have these wonderful solid metal coins that are extremely awesome to play with. You have this awesome thick cardboard. All the components are good. The player boards are fantastic. They all have player special powers. There's turn order boards on this. This game board is double-sided. There's just so much fantastic that has gone into this game. Yes, the game was a little bit more expensive, but you definitely get what you pay for with this game. It's a wonderful playing game, has a wonderful ability to play all the way up to 6 players and still be very intriguing the entire time. And again, I will admit it does play longer at 6 players, but it's still a fantastic game. Wonderful amount of replay, wonderful amount of variety. That is Empires Age of Discovery. Number 16, and dropping down from number 6, is Race for the Galaxy, a card game for 2 to 6 players. Now, Race for the Galaxy is an absolutely fantastic card game. It's a tableau building game where every single player is building their own space empire. And the objective of the game is to be the person who has the most victory points at the end of the game. Based on how well you build your tableau, based on how well you get victory points and based on how well you read the other players. Now, while this is a card game that plays up to 6 players, you may sit there and go, wow, a 6-player card game probably takes a while, especially if it's empire building. That's one of the amazing things about Race for the Galaxy. This is an empire building game that if you even played up to 6 players, and it is fun up to 6 players, but you better get some expansions, otherwise you're going to run out of cards pretty quickly. But even at a 6-player game, if everybody knows how to play the game Race for the Galaxy, a 6-player game can take only 30 to 45 minutes, which is something absolutely amazing to say. Matter of fact, you really can't say that about a lot of card games with that high player count, except probably 7 Wonders. And even 7 Wonders as a 7-player game takes all the way up to about an hour and 15 minutes. Not this game. And the reason why is because this game is played out with every single player taking simultaneous actions, and it's based on the use of these cards right here. At the start of every single game, every single player is going to get a hand of cards in their player color, and on every single turn, every single player is going to look at their hand of cards secretly based on their secondary hand of cards, which is all these cards here, based on the tableau, and every single player is simply going to play one of their cards face down. Once everybody has their card placed face down, they're all going to reveal, and that is the actions that's going to happen this turn. Now, the cool thing is, even though I play a develop action, that means everybody at the table gets to take the develop action, even if they picked a different action, such as action number 4. But the interesting thing is, since I picked the develop action, since I play the develop card, I'm going to get a bonus, and develop is going to work better for my empire than everybody else, even though they get to take the action. So this right here is a single reason why this game is so darn fast and so darn enjoyable. You have what I like to describe as a poker mechanic, because you're trying to read every single player at the table, look at their tableau, look at everything they're doing, look at how they're building their tableau, and figure out what they're doing. So you end up getting more actions every single turn. Because the ultimate objective of the turn on every single turn is you want to have the most efficient turn, more efficient than everybody else. For example, if you really, really need to consume this turn, but before you need to consume, you also need to explore because you need more cards for some reason. I know it's a bad combination, but let's just use this as an example. Let's say you need to trade consume really, really badly to do some victory points, but you also need more cards because you have a really hot card in your hand that you want to bring out. So you're going to look at the table and you're going to look across the table, okay, they don't need to trade, they really need to explore, they need to develop, that person needs to do that action, and this person is probably going to also do this action. So that means if I play the trade action, that person across the table needs to explore, so I'll still get to explore this turn, and that person is going to do a develop action, which is really good for me because I have another develop card in my hand that I'm trying to make happen. So you're trying to read the entire table every single turn, base your cards on the action of the cards you play in your turn, based on the actions of the other players, based on your tableau, and again to try to get the most victory points. Now the game is also really cool because, like I said, every single player gets a second hand of cards, and these are the cards you're going to put into play. These are your worlds, these are your developments, these are your end game victory points, and you're basically going to play these cards based on these cards you play. So every single player has 2 hands of cards, your actions you're going to play, and the cards you're going to bring into play to gain your victory points. That's Race for the Galaxy. Now the game is a little bit complex to learn. It is a little bit of an older game, and it does use a lot of icons. Now at this point in the game, I've played this game so many times that all the icons make absolute sense and they don't have any problem for me. But I'm willing to admit that when you're first learning the game, all the icons can be a little bit confusing. Once you learn the icons, what they mean and how to use them, this is an absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic game that plays quickly all the way up to 6 players, and it's a wonderful engine and a wonderful tableau building game that is Race for the Galaxy. Number 15, and dropping down from number 7, is Lords of Ziddit, a programmed movement but with a twist game for 3 to 5 players. Now, Lords of Ziddit, this is a program movement game. Now, the idea of a program movement game is every single turn, you're going to take your program movement wheel, and the game does play out over a certain amount of rounds based on the amount of players. If you want to make a shorter game, you can, but the basic idea is the game is going to play out over 12 rounds. At the start of every single round, you're going to take your program movement wheel, and you're going to program it to do certain actions. And then once every single player has programmed their entire wheel out, all the players are going to reveal their wheels without experiencing mean old Mr. Gravity, and you're going to reveal your wheel, and you have to perform these actions in order. So the way it's going to work is every single person in player order is going to do their number 1 action, then every single player is going to do the number 2 action, number 3, 4, 5, and 6 action in that order, which may seem pretty easy on the surface. You're going to go, oh, okay, I'm just going to carry out my actions that I program. Here's the trick of the game, why the game is so darn awesome. It is a race to be the first person to be at every single one of these locations. because every one of these gray cities is going to provide a resource. Now these resources are armies, because the idea of the game is you're going out to gather your armies to take out these titans, which are going to give you victory points, but in a special way. I'll explain how victory points work in just a second, because it's really, really cool. But every one of these cities is going to provide a certain amount of resources based on these armies. For example, this city will give you an army of farmers, an army of archers, another army of archers, an army of priests, and an army of wizards. Here's the trick. The first person to go to every single city has to take the first resource that's available. You can't pick your resource. So for example, let's say you want to take out this nasty titan right here, which takes an army of farmers and an army of warriors. So if I go to this city right here, I'm not going to get any warriors, so I obviously don't want to go to that city. If I go to this city right here, I'm not going to get any warriors, so I need to find a city that's going to give me warriors, and I didn't put out one of those cities. Ha! Let's pretend I flipped that one over. There's a city with warriors. So I want to go to that city that's going to provide me the army of warriors. Here's the trick. The farmers are going to be taken first, the archers are going to be taken first, then the archers, next archers are going to be taken, then the warriors will be available. So I need to go to that city when the warriors are available. But the trick is, I need to make sure there's not another player going to that city to get that warriors, but they're thinking that I'm doing the same thing. So I may go to another city to do something else. But if I do that, they may not do that thing, and then you get this total really cool mind game. As you're looking out at the table at the start of every round, and you're looking at the other players going, what are you going to do this turn? Nope, nope, not going to do that. What do you, nope, 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 not going to do that. No, oh, no, and then you're going to redo your whole table. It is a brilliant, awesome game, because it is a total, complete mind game as you're trying to read the other players. Again, kind of that poker mechanic that I really enjoy, because I love a board game that allows me to get into the mind of the other players, try to predict what they're going to do, and I'm not afraid to admit I'm always going to be the kind of person who likes to influence other players' actions by looking across the table and go, Jedi mind trick. You don't need those warriors. Of course, I do a lot better than that, but I love that in a game. I love verbalizing, talking with the other players, and trying to negotiate with other players, because it's an enjoyable mechanic for me. It's something I really enjoy. So you have this wonderful program movement game. You have this wonderful game where you're trying to get into the mind of the other players. And I'm not going to lie, you have this really cool theme where you're trying to build up these armies to take out these giant titans to score these victory points. Now back to the victory points, which is the final awesome thing about this game. Every single time you play the game, you're going to have 3 victory conditions. You're going to have the most treasure, the most castles, and the most renown from the people of the land, basically the bards of the land. And this is going to be randomized every single time you play it. And the way you're going to figure out the winner of the game is the person who has the least amount of that resource is going to be dropped out of the winning for the game. So let's say you have a 5-player game. If at the end of the game you are not one of the people with the 3 most amounts of treasure, you're out of the game. Doesn't matter what you've done. You could have the most renown, the bards sing your praises across all the lands. If you didn't have enough treasure to keep in the running, you're out. Then you're going to figure out who has the most control of the land, who's built up the most sorcerer towers. The person who did that the least, doesn't matter how well you did on everything else, you're out. And then finally, you're going to figure out who among the last players had the most renown from the bards, and you're going to be the winner of the game. The next time you play the game, it may be shuffled up. It may be the most treasures. It may be the most wizard towers. And the way you're going to go out there and defeat every one of these titans is going to give you a certain amount of gains on every one of the resources. For example, if I beat this titan right here, you're going to see that I get sorcerer towers, I get treasure, and I get the renown of the bards. Problem is, I don't get all 3 of those. I need to pick which one of those resources I want. Here's the additional final cool thing about the game. See this cool little shield right here? Guess what hides behind here? How many armies every single person has, and just how much money and just how much stuff that they managed to acquire towards the final victory of the game. So you have this awesome little mind game of reading how everybody's doing everything, try and do this program of movement. Well, that's not going to lie about this. There's some really cool components. I mean, they could have been really cheap, went out there and said, hey, have a whole bunch of cubes, but instead of that, we got some really cool miniatures to create this awesome, awesome game. That's Lords of Zidit. Number 14, moving up 2 spots from 16, is Dungeon Twister. Now, Dungeon Twister, specifically Prison, is basically the 2nd edition of the game. There was a 1st edition of the game, which is long out of print, although you can probably still get it over in Europe. And the original version of the game had a heck of a lot of more expansions. But basically, the idea of Dungeon Twister Prison is it takes the idea of the classic PC game Archon and modifies it with chess to create this wonderful little miniature arena style combat game that feels almost like a chess game. Now the game does play two players, although if you buy 2 copies of the game, and if you get a little spray paint, or if you get just some plain old paint and paint 2 extra colors, you can actually play this game as a 4-player game, and it works out perfectly fine like that, and it's actually a really fun way to play the game. Now the idea of the game is each player is working to be the first person to score 4 victory points. When the person gets 4 victory points, they win the game. But this game plays like an absolute chess game. There's a couple different ways you score victory points. The first way you score victory point is by having your piece, your warrior, exit the board on the other player's side of the board. The next way you can do it is by actually eliminating another player's hero. If you manage to do that, you're going to score a victory point, and again, 4 victory points wins the game. Now that would seem like an extremely boring, kind of simple kind of game, but there are so many more layers to the game based on the card play when you play this game. Because every single time you play this game, every single player is going to have a hand of 2 cards. The first hand of cards is going to be your combat cards, and the next hand of cards is going to be your action cards. Now the interesting thing about your action cards is every single turn on the game, you're going to have your hand of action cards. And on your turn, you're going to simply play your action card down, and that's how many actions you're going to get on a turn. Now the interesting thing is you don't get this card back until you go through your entire hand of action cards, and they're numbered all the way from 2 to number 5. So you need to strategize when is a good time to use your 2 action card and just take 2 different actions, or when is it a good time to play your 5 action cards, which allows you to take 5 actions, which can allow you to interact with the board, which gives it the name of Dungeon Twister, which allows you to turn the board tiles around, allows you to attack other players, allows you to pick up items on the board such as spears, such as ropes, things that allow you to interact with the other players. And oh yeah, I failed to mention that every single one of these heroes has their own special unique power, but that's how the actions work. The next thing that adds to the fun of the game is the combat cards. Now every single one of these heroes has a certain amount of combat value. Obviously the gigantic Colossus has a much higher combat value than this little mechanic orc over here. So you are needing to judge every time you perform a combat action. So for example, let's say my Colossus decided to attack this orc over here. I'd play one of my combat cards to the table, and then my opponent plays their combat card. Higher wins. Here's the trick of the game. Every single one of these combat cards are numbered all the way from 0 all the way up to 6. But when you play any card except for your 0 card, it's removed from the game. So you need to judge when is it a good time to play your high-powered combat card. Obviously, if my Colossus is attacking this little orc, it'd be a complete waste for me to play my 6 card, but my opponent knows that. So my opponent may play a 0 card knowing that I'm going to waste a card, but what if I play the 0 card knowing my opponent knows what I know, what I know, what I know, what I don't know, what I do know. Yeah, you've seen that movie scene, so I'm not going to reimagine that scene all over again, but you get the point. So the game becomes a mind game as you're looking at your other player across from the table from you, trying to remember what cards they played, knowing what combat strength they potentially have left, and knowing if you can defeat them in a combat. And again, like I said, every single card except that 0 card, once it's played, it's gone from the game completely. So combat is played out in this game with 0 dice. There is no randomness in this game when it comes to combat. The only amount of randomness in the game is at the start of the game, you're going to set up all these boards upside down, and every single one of these boards is going to get a random amount, well not a random, a specified amount, but you're going to randomize the way items are going to enter the board, and all these items have special powers, and all of our heroes have special powers. So the way you're going to set up and play the game is randomized when you set up, but when you play the game, there's no randomness to it at all. Your actions are set based on watching what your opponents are doing, your combat's set based on what your opponents are doing, and you're playing this wonderful, brilliant mind game that's a combination of fantasy mixed with chess that plays all the way up to 4 players if you just want to take a little bit of ingenuity. That is Dungeon Twister Prison. Number 13, and dropping ever so slightly down for number 11, is Seasons. Now, if the components in this game look very familiar because it looks a lot like Lords of Zidit, it should, because Seasons occurs in the same world as Lords of Zidit. Now, Seasons is a 2 to 4 player dice game where players are going to be rolling dice to gain resources to get these cards, which are going to allow them to get victory points, which on the surface almost seems kind of a boring kind of game if you kind of think about it. But this game is definitely not a boring game. As a matter of fact, it is actually a phenomenal, really fantastic design, and it's amazing how all these mechanics go together to create this really interesting game. Now, at the start of every single game, the players are going to draft their hand of cards, and these cards are going to be the way they're going to get the victory points every single time they play the game. And these cards have certain requirements to bring them into play based on resources, and every one of these cards is going to give you a certain amount of victory points. Here's the trick. Once you get your hand of cards, you're going to break them down into 3 years, because this game is played over 3 years. You're only going to get a certain amount of cards every single year, so you want to plan how you're going to put your card out into your library. And every single turn, players are going to roll dice depending on what season we're in and depending on what year we're in, and of course depending on how many players we happen to have. Every single player, start of the turn, we're going to roll a dice, and players in player order are going to take these dice, which are going to give them resources. Some of these resources are victory points, some of these resources are the resources that actually allow them to put these cards into play. And then you are going to put these resources on your player board, and you can only have so many resources based on the level of your wizard. The more powerful your wizard is, the more resources you can keep, the more victory points you get, and it creates this really interesting lock-type mechanic of just how everything here works together. Now, I love dice games, even though dice games pretty much hate me. If you ever see me roll dice in games, it's like almost like a comedy show, because if I need to roll high, I'm going to roll low. If I need to roll low, I'm going to roll high, unless I'm playing an RPG. Then I'm just magic when it comes to rolling dice. But the cool thing about this game is I can play a really fantastic dice game where I don't feel like I'm being cheated by the dice, because the way the game is being played, every single player suffers the same fate of the dice, because you're going to auction for these dice. So when these dice get into my cursed little hands, everybody gets to suffer my dice curse, and they all need to play with my dice curse, which feels like a wonderful evening of the playing field for me and allows me to enjoy a really good dice game. So the players all together in player order, based on the season, based on the year, are going to be gaining the resources from the dice, playing through 3 years, playing these cards and trying to be the most efficient with the simple cards that you auction from the start of the game. So the very simple idea of taking a game where every single player is just simply trying to auction cards to get the most victory points and bring these cards into play to gain the victory points is going to be how the game is going to be played. One final thing that adds one little nice little twist into the game, though, is at the end of the game, if you have cards left in your hand and you didn't plan well enough, you're going to lose victory points. So there's a really interesting mechanic of, do I want to take this card into my hand? This card and this card work really well together, but this card doesn't work too well together, so maybe I want to send this card on to another player so they get stuck with it. But then they may get this card which works really well with it, so maybe I don't want to have it. So maybe that penalty may be worth it, so they don't get this really good combination, which is going to give them a lot of victory points. And again, there's a chance that the dice may not come out in my favor, so I need to factor in all of these mechanics, find the perfect card hand, work with the dice, work with the resources, build up my wizard, become the best sorcerer over 3 years. That is Seasons. Number 12 on the list, and jumping way up from 28, is Mage Night, the board game. Now at this point, I almost feel like I can just go, mic drop, I'll walk away, because at this point, everybody should pretty much know what Mage Night is. Mage Night is a game of exploration, a game of adventure, a deck building game, a game of challenge, a cooperative game, a competitive game, a game where players are exploring the land, a game where players are trying to get the best hand of cards, a game where players are trying to level up. It's a fantasy adventure game where players are trying to get the biggest army, the best magic items, the best spells, and conquer this land, because you're not really a hero, you're more of an anti-hero sent out to go and conquer this land for the wonderful, or maybe not so wonderful, agency that sent you out to do just that very thing. Now this game has a lot of expansions available for it, and as you see here, I do have them, and they add a lot to the gameplay and a lot to the challenge. So some of these things I say may not be in the base game if that's all you're looking for, but basically I'm going to go over what Mage Night is. In the game of Mage Night, every single player gets a hand of cards that's going to be based on your specific Mage Night that's unique to you. Every single one of these hands of cards is slightly unique. They have their own special cards that's unique to that specific Mage Night. And of course there's some cards that are shared among all the Mage Knights. Your objective is to use this hand of cards to the most efficiently as you can to go out there and complete a specific scenario. Whether that scenario has become the highest level, go out there and conquer a couple castles, defeat the other players, or maybe even defeat the big bad guy, it all based on a specific scenario you're specifically trying to choose. You're going to explore the lands by using your actions, doing your resources, and this is all going to be based on the playing of cards, and the cards you play are going to give you your actions. Some cards you're going to play are going to allow you to move, some cards are going to give you attack, some cards are going to give you the ability to heal, some of these cards are going to allow you to interrogate, or I should say, suggest that some of the civilians join your cause, and you're going to go out there and raid these lands, attacking castles, defeating marauding orcs, defeating mighty dragons in an effort to become the most powerful Mage Knight and complete this scenario. Now this game is absolutely brilliant. It is a beyond phenomenal game. It's probably, well, I'm not saying probably. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say most people probably won't argue with me, but what I'm going to say is this is the absolute best solo game ever made. If you can get through the rules, and the rules are not hard once you know how to play the game, but learning this game can be a challenge because the rules are spread across 2 rule books, and there's lots of offset case rules and lots of specific rules that make the game a little bit of a challenge to learn. But if you start the game with the game walkthrough and learn it through that, it's really not that hard to learn. And once you learn the game, all the mechanics make sense. If you've ever played a deck builder, if you ever played an exploration game, if you ever played an adventure game, imagine all those things put together and you're going to realize that everything in this game just makes sense. It's a wonderful game. It's a fantastic game. It creates a wonderful environment where you feel like you are this mighty Mage Knight entering this world, and you're going to become this awesome, more powerful Mage Knight, slowly taking out orcs, working your way up to dragons, taking out mighty sorcerer towers, taking out cities, again, based on the scenario you're playing, trying to become the most powerful Mage Knight. That is Mage Knight, the board game. Number 11, and moving up from 15, is Terra Mystica, a 2 to 5 player game that is best played as a 4 or 5 player game. In Terra Mystica, this is a civilization type of game where every single player is trying to convert this wonderful world into their favorite environment. For example, you have the giants who want to convert everything into mountains. You have all these different races. Oh, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, because in Terra Mystica, every single player has their own civilization that is trying to move across this land. You're going to move across this land, and you're going to start off with your small little hovels that can only be built in the kind of landmass that you are used to living in. For example, like I said, the giants like to live in the mountains, and you're going to upgrade these small little hovels into larger buildings, possibly into larger buildings, and these are going to give you all these wonderful resources. Now, these resources are going to allow you to activate your powers, they're going to allow you to activate your special abilities, they're going to allow you to interact with the other players, because that is one of the most awesome things about Terra Mystica. Now, in a lot of these games, it behooves you, when you play these style of games, to kind of pick your own corner of the board away from the other players, so you can kind of build up your own little empire and get a lot of victory points. This game encourages you to do the exact opposite, because as you are playing the game, if you play with other players, as you should, but as you're playing with the other players and interacting with the other players, if you build up in areas where they already exist, you're going to get extra bonuses. So this game forces the players right from the beginning to start locking heads and start interacting with each other. The trick here is, as you're interacting with the other players, you're also penalizing yourself a little bit. You're gaining power, and you're affecting the amount of victory points in the game. So every single move is a solid decision you need to make. Is it worth the amount of victory points, the amount of power gain, and everything that's going to happen, along with the mechanics of the game. Now, add on to the fact that in this game, every single race plays very, very differently. Every single one of these races has their own special, unique powers. They have their own way that they interact with the board. They have their own way that they're going to terraform the planet into their own special resource. Everything that happens is completely different, and the game is a very, very strong game where all of the gameplay is based on knowing how the other races work, how the other races interact with your race, and the game even starts right before the game actually even begins by picking a race that is very efficient at working against other races. So while the game comes with multiple different races, every single one of these race boards is double-sided. You have one side here, you have the giants. On the other side, you have the other red team, and what they do is they work differently. So while the giants may work one way and they have their own special abilities and how they're going to interact, the chaos magicians on the other side, while they also play red, interact differently and they play differently. So while I may take the chaos magicians when I start the game, another player may say, he's playing the chaos magician, so I think what I'm going to play is I'm going to play the engineers against him. And somebody else will say, well, shoot, if they're playing the engineers, maybe I'm going to play the witches, or something along those lines, and then the game is going to begin. And then the players are going to work on converting this land into their own special kind of landmass that they specifically like in an effort to gain victory points. And the final thing I didn't even mention, players also have workers that they're going to send to a priest board that's going to give them extra victory points, extra special abilities, extra powers that's going to interact and give them extra special things, allow them to gain money, gain resources, gain extra priests, gain extra interaction with the board, with a more even interesting mechanic of every single round is going to be scored based on a special round scoring mechanism that's going to be varied every single time you play the game. Now, Terra Mystica is a game that's been out for a long time. There's a more I don't want to say modern because I actually prefer this game over Gaia, but there's another game from the same company called Gaia, which takes the idea of Terra Mystica and puts it in space, makes it a 4-player only game, and does a slight little bit of modification that some people do prefer. Me personally, I think Terra Mystica is still the better game. It's a wonderful, fantastic game, and an awesome game to end out this list with number 11, Terra Mystica. Hope you enjoyed this part of the list covering games number 20 all the way down to number 11. Now there's been some shuffling going on the list from the 2017 edition of this list, and of course there's one brand new game that was definitely out of the list and really deserved the strong place it got. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's OTSBGR@gmail.com. I'll be sure to answer them as quick as I can. Also, click that subscription button down below so you can get notifications when the final video on the list series goes up. That's going to cover games number 10 all the way up to number 1, which is definitely going to have some really good surprises in it. There are 2 new games in the final top 10. One of them is going to be really fun, and it's going to be a really good explanation why there were some shufflings going on the list. Anyways, that's enough of the wah-wah, wah-wah, wah-wah. Thanks for watching.